Chief Justice Mogoeng Mogoeng's rise through the courts was rapid and perhaps unexpected. Barely 3 years after joining the apex court, his name was favoured by then-President Jacob Zuma to preside over the Concourt. This raised some concerns over Mogoeng's suitability.
Chief Justice Mogoeng Mogoeng came into office on the back of much controversy around his appointment. Firstly, this was based on his previous judicial pronouncements, which seemed to question his commitment to the fundamental principles of the Constitution, and particularly those of equality, gender equality in particular, as well as broader issues in the Bill of Rights. There was also controversy because he was the sole candidate that was put forward by then-President Zuma to the Judicial Service Commission. And I think a key concern was the fact that if you only interview one candidate, how do you know that the best person is being appointed?
There was a lot of noise that was made at the time when he came on as Chief Justice. A lot of it there was some unfairness in the criticism, and he came under tremendous amount of attack. But there were some certain questions that he should have been asked, as would have been asked with any candidate, particularly on his judicial track record. There were some judgments that he had written, for example, on rape, which he needed to explain.
Mogoeng's entrance coincided with a period when the judiciary was also under much attack.
I call the matter of
So Chief Justice Mogoeng's tenure as Chief Justice coincided with a lot of upheaval in the judiciary itself, but also in the country. The economy wasn't performing very well, so judges had to do more with less resources.
His 12 years at the apex court could be viewed in two phases.
The earlier part of his tenure, where he sought to address those concerns about his qualities as Chief Justice, and certainly made strenuous efforts to demonstrate to South Africa that he was indeed a good choice as Chief Justice. He formed a collegiate atmosphere at the Constitutional Court, and some of those judgments of the court certainly consolidated constitutional provisions.
Mogoeng's nomination by Zuma raised eyebrows over his autonomy.
Thank you.
However, the CJ was vocal in championing for judicial independence. He also criticized political and state interference.
The judiciary was under severe attack, and there were points where he stood up and stood quite firm for the judiciary, and that inspired the broader public.
In 2016, he handed down a judgment of singular importance, one that defined Mogoeng as a Chief Justice.
The President thus failed to uphold, defend, and respect the Constitution as the supreme law of the land.
In March 2016, in a unanimous and scathing judgment, a full bench of the Concourt ruled that President Jacob Zuma and the National Assembly had violated the Constitution. 2 years after the public protector's remedial action for Zuma to pay back the money for the non-security upgrade to his Nkandla homestead was not upheld.
His judgment in the Nkandla matter, I think, stands out as the high-water mark of his tenure as Chief Justice.
Each judge has a unique style, and I think Chief Justice Mogoeng's style was really seen in the wider impact of his judgments. He has written the famous Nkandla judgment, which some say was a turning point in our country.
In the last few years, however, Mogoeng's leadership was neither tangible nor overtly visible.
In the latter years, he has been somewhat of an absentee Chief Justice, sitting in very few cases in recent years and really not taking on his responsibilities as head of the court as well as the head of the Judicial Service Commission with the seriousness.
Towards the end of his tenure, though, there were some concerns about particularly his public statements. Some of them, a lot of people felt that they perhaps should have not been made by the Chief Justice in particular, and they detracted from what would have been a legacy that he could be proud.
Mogoeng nevertheless did have an impact on the judiciary.
The major reforms that the Chief Justice initiated. Right now, we have a written code of conduct that guides judges. We also have a set of norms and standards which tells us how courts should perform. So his legacy will be felt on those issues.
As the Chief Justice doffs his green robe and leaves the highest office in the judiciary after 12 years, will his legacy persist and shine, or be a mere footnote in judicial history? Hasina Gori, SABC News, Constitutional Court,